Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Elliot Engel of New York, and as you can see, we have a strong bipartisan delegation here, and we expect to be joined by Eric Cantor very soon. And we are a bipartisan delegation because support for Israel in this Congress and in the United States is bipartisan. And we are here to speak with one voice, simply to support Israel's right to self-defense. As a sovereign democratic nation, Israel has the right to control its borders and halt shipping to prevent the entry of weapons into the territory of a belligerent neighbor. The United States should support its ally Israel unequivocally as it acts in its own self-defense. What happened with the flotilla is very, very clear. They were not there to provide a humanitarian aid or so-called humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. Israel gave them the opportunity to land in the port of Ashdod, to inspect the vehicle, and to take off anything that was humanitarian and ship it to Gaza. The people on the flotilla rejected that. And they rejected it because they were there to provoke confrontation and to break up the embargo, not to deliver humanitarian aid. So this should be very, very clear. The people on that flotilla have ties to terrorist organizations, and Israel has the absolute right to protect itself from Iranian missiles and weapons coming in. Israel has had a situation for years where from Gaza there were missiles raining on civilian populations. Can you imagine in the United States if we had that coming from Canada or Mexico or any place else? Would we just sit idly by and allow that to happen? Or would we want to make sure that these weapons were not being delivered to places that could use the weapons to harm the United States? Secondly, we are here to oppose any kind of international investigation. As a sovereign democratic state, Israel has the ability and competence to investigate itself. UN-run commissions will only be biased, as we saw with the Goldstone report, and the United Nations has shown itself to be unabashedly anti-Israel, no matter what. 1/4 of the resolutions coming out of the United Nations condemn Israel. When there's starvation in Darfur and all kinds of terrorism around the world, the United Nations has not shown itself to be anything near impartial. And so we don't believe that an international investigation by the UN or by the so-called Human Rights Council of the UN would be effective. We really need to focus on the real threat in the Middle East, and that's Iran. The real threat to the Middle East is Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons. We should not become distracted by a few protesters when Ahmadinejad's nuclear program could cause the deaths of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And finally, let me say that I had a press conference with a number of my colleagues in New York a few days ago. And I was recently handed this petition, and I want to show it to you. This is from New York's Jewish Community Relations Council. It is signed by 18,000 fellow New Yorkers. It's now grown to 23,000, calling on the State Department to investigate any and all of the passengers of the Javi Marmara and other ships from Turkey's IHH flotilla to apply for visas to enter the United States. We are told that these people on the flotilla are applying for visas to come and spew their hatred and their propaganda in the United States. And I think that anyone connected to terrorism should not be allowed to come to this country. And it's clear that people on this flotilla are connected to terrorism. So I've written to Secretary Clinton on this, and I'm awaiting a response, and I intend to deliver these petitions to the State Department today or tomorrow. It's now my great pleasure. Oh, okay. You want to go over now? Okay, it's now my great pleasure to call on Eric Cantor, the Minority Whip, who's always been a very strong and forceful supporter of U.S.-Israel relations.
Thank you. Good morning. As you can see, we're here together in a bipartisan fashion effort to demonstrate support on Capitol Hill for the United States to stand up in support of our ally Israel. I know many of us have a question, and that is, when is this administration going to learn that hesitancy at all regarding unabashed support for Israel in this country will have a detrimental effect on allies and enemies of the United States in the region, period. United States foreign policy has always been built upon the notion of peace through strength. It has been built upon the notion that we stand up for our allies who also support, promote freedom, human progress, and the furtherance of peace. Any indication, any reports that I have heard over the last 24 hours that indicate that our administration is somehow complicit in an effort to push out a UN resolution calling for an international investigation of the Palestinian or of the flotilla headed for Gaza is an outrage. We're here not only to urge this administration to veto any such resolution, but to stand up, speak out in opposition to such right now.
Okay, you want me to go? Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a tremendous pleasure for me to stand here with my colleagues who are among the strongest supporters of a strong relationship between the United States and the State of Israel. I am an unabashed supporter of Israel, not because I am a Jewish woman, but because I am an American. And I think it is in this nation's best interest that the relationship between the United States and Israel stand together. It is an extremely important thing for all of the democracies throughout the world to stand together against a common enemy. There are a number of issues I'd like to bring up today. The United Nations, we are hearing rumors, is once again preparing to condemn Israel, just like it did last year in the Goldstone Report. The Goldstone Report was nothing short of an outrage and a sham. How people can say that they support Israel's right to self-defense, except when Israel actually attempts to defend itself, is completely beyond me. And you saw the extraordinary anti-Semitism that pulses through the veins of the United Nations when they issued that Goldstone Report, condemning the State of Israel for doing what any sovereign nation would be expected to do in order to protect its civilian citizens. We are talking about a minimum of 8,000 rockets being launched from the Gaza into Israel. If anything, rather than disproportionate force, I believe at that time Israel exercised extraordinary restraint. But the United Nations did not see it that way. We are now faced with an almost similar situation, where Israel did what any sovereign nation would have done that has a blockade in order to prevent weapons from coming into the Gaza, in order for Hamas to further strengthen its numbers and its ability to harm Israel. As Congressman Engel said, Israel did everything in its power to allow humanitarian aid to come through. That flotilla had nothing to do with humanitarian aid. It had everything to do with what happened, exactly what happened. And if Israel is at fault in any way, it is for falling into the trap that was set for them by Turkey. Now, the Turks have extraordinary nerve to lecture the State of Israel when they are occupiers of the island of Cyprus, where they systematically discriminate against the ecumenical patriarch, and they refuse to recognize Armenian genocide. And this is the country that not only funded, but sanctioned the flotilla. They did not do this for humanitarian reasons. They did this to provoke an international confrontation. Well, as far as I'm concerned, Turkey is responsible for the 9 deaths aboard that ship. It is not Israel that is responsible. Israel's troops were attacked. Now we are talking about the United Nations, the exact same body that sanctioned and voted in favor of the Goldstone report. They want another international inquiry, as if Israel is not capable of doing its own inquiry as to what happened. The United States has agreed with Israel that Israel will conduct its own investigation. It has added 2 people from other countries in order to provide a fair and balanced approach, and for Israel to be above reproach when it comes to this investigation. And yet, the United Nations is still agitating for an investigation. It would be my hope and my expectation, as Congressman Cantor stated, that the United States will vigorously fight any attempt for an international investigation run by what I consider a very dishonest body, the United Nations. Turkey has been a very bad actor. I cannot tell you what their motivations are. But when they side against the United States when it comes to sanctions against Iran, arguably the most dangerous country on the planet, I draw a line that they have just crossed. Turkey has also warmly welcomed the Iranian president, Ahmadinejad, and the genocidal Sudanese president, Omar al-Bashir, to its borders and welcomed them to their country warmly. And this is the nation that is agitating for the United Nations to do an investigation of the democratic state of Israel. Meanwhile, the North Koreans go unpunished for acts of war against the South Koreans. The Iranian regime stands on the precipice of creating a nuclear weapon that will be a danger not only to Israel, to the United States, to Europe, but the rest of the Arab world as well. It is time that the United Nations does its job. And as Elliot said, so much of its time is spent bashing the state of Israel. How about they do the job that they were created to do and take a better look into themselves and figure out what they're going to do in order to promote democracy, rule of law, liberty and freedom across the planet. I am astounded that the world body would do this, but I would be livid if the United States didn't do everything in our power, stand by our most reliable ally on the planet, the only democracy in a very dangerous part of the world, stand as one with the state of Israel. That's where our destiny lies. That's where we should be. That's where we need to be. And I thank you very much.
My name is Ted Poe. I am a member of Congress from Texas, a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and Terrorism Subcommittee. The state of Israel is under siege. It is under siege by nations that do not like it. On the north, you have the terrorist organization of Hezbollah constantly at war with Israel. In the south, you have in Gaza, Hamas at war with Israel. Israel has the absolute right, as any free nation has, to defend itself from any attack from anyone. And that is what they are doing, protecting the dignity and the sovereignty of their own nation. We in the United States must make it clear, and there should be no doubt about it, that we stand with Israel in what has occurred in their right of absolute self-defense when it came to this flotilla. And that should be clear not only to Israel, Americans, but to those who oppose Israel's right to exist as well. To that extent, myself and Gary Peters from Michigan have a letter that we are sending the President this day, asking and making sure that the United States stand for Israel, stand for their right to defend itself. On this letter, we already have 126 members of Congress, bipartisan, including not only Eric Cantor and the members that are behind me, but the majority leader and the minority leader both have signed on to this letter to the president to ask the president to stand firm, stand with Israel's right of absolute self-defense, and make that message clear to all of those in the world. Israel's defense of itself was something that I think they showed great restraint in taking care of their own individuals who were attacked on this ship that turned out not to be really a humanitarian ship, but it was a ruse to make sure that they could have a publicity statement throughout the world about what is taking place. Hamas even refused to take the humanitarian aid on this ship. That shows you what Hamas is all about. The real culprit in all of this is, of course, the little fellow from the desert, Ahmadinejad, sitting back at home trying to manipulate the world attention against what he's doing and his threat of nuclear destruction of Israel and putting Israel on trial on the world stage. So we must make it clear as a nation. Our president, we would hope, would make it clear to the world that we will support Israel's right of self-defense. And that this nation, as apparently happened early on after this episode, started giving advice to Israel about its border security issues, about how to defend itself and its national security. We have no right or duty to tell Israel how to defend itself. And it's somewhat ironic, we would be giving a nation advice on border security when we have our own border security issues with the southern border of the United States. We would not want some other nation telling us, especially an ally, how to secure our borders. But yet we give advice. So I would think that the United States, rather than give advice, should show support and show one-manship with the state of Israel, that we support their right of self-defense, and that the President heeds the comments by 126 members of the United States House of Representatives, including both leaders of both parties, to support unequivocally Israel's right to defend itself against terrorism.
I'm Pete King, 3rd District of New York, and I'm really proud to join all of my colleagues here today, Democrat and Republican, including, of course, my friend from New York, Elliot Engel. All of us stand in strong, absolute support of Israel. Israel, has been said, is our closest ally in the region, the only democracy. This flotilla was clearly coordinated through Turkey, through IHH, which is a terrorist-supporting organization. We should make it, and I call upon the President to make it absolutely clear that the United States will veto any attempt by the Security Council to have any UN investigation at all of Israel. I commend Israel for setting up its own investigative team, including 2 people from outside Israel, to take part in that investigation. We have to make it absolutely clear. There's no hesitation here. Do we want the UN investigating everything we're doing in Afghanistan or Iraq or any other place in the world? As Ted Poe said, do we want people second-guessing us and how we are attempting to secure our southern border? Israel is a sovereign nation. If this were any other country which was enforcing a blockade to protect itself, you would not see any of the type of reaction that we got when Israel, in defense of itself, 9 people were killed. And as Shelley Berkeley said, I believe that blood is on the hands of Turkey, because they were the ones coordinating this. They tried to precipitate this, and they got what they were looking for, unfortunately. But the fact is that to have such a mass rush of international opinion and people in the media, people in politics running to condemn Israel, to me shows that Israel is not just the #1 target of its enemies in the Middle East, it's also the target of many intellectuals and media types throughout the world. Anyone who's traveled to Europe and watched television and see the biased coverage against Israel knows what I'm talking about. Similarly, the UN is clearly biased against Israel. And so it's important, I believe, that we send a clear message that the U.S. is standing with Israel, no ifs, ands, or buts, no equivocation whatsoever, and that we recognize Israel not just as our closest ally, but as a sovereign nation which has the absolute right to defend itself, including a blockade. And that's why it's important we have this bipartisan expression of support, and I'm proud to be here today. Thank you.
I'm Mike Pence, Indiana, and I'm the chairman of the House Republican Conference, but I'm here today in my capacity as the co-chair of the Israel Allies Caucus, I want to thank my co-chair, Elliot Engel, for his eloquent words and for his extraordinary leadership on this issue. Likewise, I've worked on legislation in the past with Congresswoman Shelley Berkeley, Peter King, and Ted Poe. These are among the strongest voices on behalf of our most cherished ally in the Congress of the United States. And as should be apparent to anyone looking on, support for Israel on Capitol Hill is overwhelming and bipartisan and unambiguous. Members of the United States Congress in overwhelming numbers understand that Israel is our most cherished ally. We grieve the loss of life in the recent military confrontation over the Flotilla, but Israel has a right of self-defense. We come before you today not only to give voice for the fact that overwhelming and bipartisan majorities on Capitol Hill support Israel's right of self-defense, but also to call on this administration to do likewise. It is imperative not only that this administration be prepared to veto any effort for an international investigation into this incident, but it is imperative that this administration actively oppose any effort to launch a UN investigation against Israel's action against this flotilla. Israel has established an inquiry. They have invited international observers and participants into that inquiry, and we respect Israel's sovereign right of self-defense, and we respect her capability to investigate every aspect of this incident and present that information first to their citizens and then to the world. The record of the United Nations with regard to Israel is abysmal. The last 33 of the last 40 resolutions adopted by the UN Human Rights Council have been opposed to the state of Israel. The recent Goldstone report that has been mentioned actually accused Israel of crimes against humanity because they took military action to cease what had become the raining of thousands of Katyusha rockets on innocent men, women, and children being fired out of Gaza. The reality is this blockade in Gaza has saved lives. It has saved lives in Israel. It has saved lives in Gaza by preventing the need for additional further military action by Israel and preventing the launching of rockets. Lastly, it's important to say that as members of Congress, we recognize there is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Israel permits the transfer of some 10,000 tons of medical supplies and food into Gaza every single week. This flotilla, launched from Turkey with the complicity of the Turkish government, had one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to challenge the blockade, and in that sense to challenge Israel's right of self-defense. In this cause, America, from Capitol Hill to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, must be unambiguous. If the world knows nothing else, let it know this: America stands with Israel. Question.